yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Born and dead, saved by love, count my blessings from above. Though in darkness, have no fear. Light will shine on those holding near. They know that sorrow they will pass. For I know in this life there will be something. But remember that love, yes it will. Love will reign. Yeah. Love will reign. Yeah. In my heart, I believe it. Love will reign. Oh, yeah, yeah. Have a vision, it's clear and plain. People living life, smiling again. Oh, see the children, they know no pain. Far from pressure, stress and strain. Oh, sorrow, they will pass. For I know in this life there's gonna be some pain. But remember that love, yes it will. I know. Yeah. Love will reign. Gotta believe it. In my heart, I truly believe sun will shine again. And love, I can hardly wait. In the light of the sun, we'll all be together. There'll be peace, peace, sweet peace. There'll be peace, happiness and joy forever. Oh, yeah. One day, someday, hate will be over and love will reign. They won't last, for I know in this life there's gonna be some pain. But in the end, love will reign.
Love Will Reign. We love that song, and we thank Kier Coleman Ward for his exceptional gift and talent and sharing it here in the Love and Stuff community with that fantastic song, Love Will Reign, which is the title track on his project. And we invite you to go across all outlets and support Kier Coleman Ward and thank him again for allowing us to use this song. I am Marcus Holmes, the love activist. I am advocating for better love in the world for you and me. And whether you're watching us live from the Love and Stuff community page here on Facebook or the Marcus R. Holmes page or any of the love groups or pages that are connected, or you're watching us from LinkedIn Live or Twitch TV or Twitter or YouTube events, take a moment and click share. Tag 5 of your closest connections, subscribers, followers, or friends, 5 of the more popular ones to join in what I know will be a great discussion tonight with an amazing cast of panel members who have brilliant minds but bring us very great perspectives from different seats. And I hope that you will join in the conversation by dropping in the comments as you hear different things tonight. I hope that they will awaken you to the love of justice, for the love of justice. You know, in the Love and Stuff diaspora, if you will, we've got a whole lot of things that we love. We love the scriptures, we love people, men and women love each other, right? We love sports. And as we started out with the love for justice, tonight is very fitting to come back to that. And you'll hear more about that moving forward, about this love for justice. Not everybody sees justice as the same thing, but I think you might agree that justice seems to be maybe under assault across the country. There are state lawmakers and others that are proposing bills to limit diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at state funded institutions. Some of these have moved into being laws and more than just proposals, right? And they could impact a wide range of initiatives from defunding diversity, equity, and inclusion offices and officers and removing diversity statements from hiring practices. Nearly half of the states, I think about 23 so far, have either proposed anti DEI bills, some have failed, or are in the process of drafting them on many of those House and Senate floors. A growing number of states have legislation that will restrict or ban diversity initiatives in public funded and state funded organizations, especially colleges. There are currently more than 40 bills across the country, and as of June 19th, 6 have been signed into law by governor, 2 in Florida, 1 in each of the Dakotas, 1 in Tennessee, and most recently, 1 in Texas. So I want you to know that whether or not you live in any of those states, I want you to think about the schools that are in those states and your family members that are in those states, and whether or not today it's South Dakota and tomorrow it could be a city or town or state in which you live. Well, I'm excited to have some great legal minds that are here with me and some others that will join us to talk about this. And I hope that you will click share and invite others to join in this conversation. First, Valerie Colbert Osamwede is a brilliant legal mind, and I am always honored to have her here. For the Love of Justice uh, really gets a lot of its leg from some of the great conversations that we have. Her and the next guest that I'm going to introduce, because I really believe that their minds are needed in this day and time. We started out talking about this manifesto and calling you to action, that action shouldn't just start at election time, that we're in a continual cycle of fighting and standing for the love of justice. And I can't impress that upon you enough, those of you who may think that you only need to vote when you need to vote. Your voice matters. And when you get engaged and understand the power of your voice, I think we will move into an era, a time, maybe reminiscent of times in the past, where people are really engaged in what happens in the future and they see their lives as being an outpouring of that, connected to that. And until you see it affecting you, or I see it affecting me, it might not be a matter that I would put my energy into. So my hope is that as you hear this clarion call for the love of justice, that even if it's not your state, that you get into a state of mind that we have to be engaged, we have to be vocal, and we have to be vigilant. So I want to welcome Valerie Colbert Olson-Wady to join us. Also joining us is another sage legal mind. I love having these minds together. Brenda Bracewell is just a fantastic retired attorney, retired legal mind, but her mind is not retired, right? She is continuing to add sage wisdom to our conversations and helping us to think differently and have different perspectives and challenge our own perspectives to make them better. So I'm enriched today, and you will be too, by having both of them join us. Thank you both for joining us tonight. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm always, I feel uplifted when I'm on the panel with Val.
I think we all do, Brenda. I think we all do. So I want to just jump in because I didn't, and I've been talking, having the backstory. So those that are watching and will watch, I get to steal some of Val's time. I hate to use the word steal, but I do, of her time to talk about a lot of these issues. And Val, one of the things that really struck me is that the number of states that are contending with this type of legislation, we're talking about 23 and growing. I just wonder, where are educators, organizations, people on this issue where it seems like it's sneaking almost in the back door in some of these places? Talk to us a little bit as we open up about what you have uncovered as it relates to the volume of legislation and proposals that are happening throughout the country.
Well, thanks for having me on, Marcus, and good to see you, Brenda, as always. One of the things that is really the growing theme, or the theme, and it's amazing how the word woke has been hijacked to mean something divisive, and it's been politicized. And when woke really just ultimately means being considering the needs, the needs of people other than yourself, really, if you think about it in that broader sense. That's what it means to be woke, to be aware, to be sensitive to the needs of those of marginalized communities, people, and perhaps designing programming, or having the opportunities for those people to actually participate in our society, And so the main thrust that we have here is everyone claiming they're doing away with this woke ideology, this woke, woke ideology, and Florida is probably the one that's on the forefront of all of this. But there's a lot of different states, as you've indicated before, that is jumped on this bandwagon. And part of it is political. Part of it is, when we look at Florida and Ron DeSantis, is now we know he's in a has thrown his hat in the ring for president, Republican nomination for presidency. And part of that is to make it through the primary, with the base vote, because his ideals are certainly not supported by the vast majority of the electorate in the United States. It's just not supported. And so whatever the case may be, he is pandering to a base. And unfortunately, there are laws being put in place that will certainly impact folks for generations. But there are, in fact, folks that are pushing back against this. The ACLU has a case in front of the 11th Circuit, which is the circuit that deals with Florida. that they are challenging this law. You have the NAACP challenging this law. Matter of fact, I think you probably know that the NAACP put a travel ban out for African Americans, Black Americans going to Florida for a myriad of things, not only just travel, but actually thinking of relocating there. And part of their travel ban is a showcase that, you know, if you relocate and you have kids in Florida or whatever, your children are not going to be taught, you know, really African American history, not in its pure, not in the realistic terms. So, you know, those are some of the things that you need to think about when you're talking about, you know, what this legislation is. But there are challenges to it. Don't get me wrong. People aren't just sitting around and waiting for it to happen. There were challenges to do a preliminary injunction when in Florida, for example, when the House bill, because there's two bills there. House bill was actually put into place, and like I said, so people are challenging these laws on First Amendment grounds, equal protection grounds, 14th Amendment grounds, all of those grounds that will hopefully will actually look at these laws, because they're very vague and very broad. And we know, and Brenda knows, overly broad and vague laws are unconstitutional. You know, they have to be rewritten so you know what is constitutional. So you say that, and I'll just kind of piggyback before I go on, or you direct another question. I just do want to reiterate or tell you that, you know, Ohio just recently did the same thing. You know, that's our neighbors, where a bill was sponsored by a Republican senator, and he claims that it's rescuing free speech and academic freedom. And his opening was, you know, for too long, academic freedom has been suppressed in Ohio's public university by a woke ideology. That's the new term that has led to an all-out assault on First Amendment. And so he has pretty much kind of modeled a bill in Ohio, which would do what it is doing in Florida. You know, so, but you know, you got Arizona that has the same kind of law that they have requiring. What's interesting in Arizona and some of these other states, some of them are not even looking at public universities, but they're looking at employment too, and saying that, you know, public entities can't require employees to engage in a DEI program. So if you are, or you know, if you have a DEI program or sensitivity training or whatever, these bills are meant to make those go by the wayside. And you can't spend public funds on DEI programs. You can't contract with a company that does that, that participates in the DEI program, and or hire employees that will be dispensing DEI programs. I mean, we already talked about Florida. That's the main focus. But then you have the legislature. You have legislation in Kansas, where there's an amendment that passed in April that prohibited state funding for applicants, employees, students, or contractors of higher education institutions to endorse any ideology, including the ideology of diversity, equity, or inclusion, or to provide a diversity statement. So sometimes when you're hired, you know, you sign those, you know, I will encourage diversity or whatever. When you're hired, they don't even want you to do that. Missouri has the same similar law. Montana, you're talking about all these other states. Oklahoma, you talked about Texas. It is incredible the speed, almost like the speed of the abortion laws, the speed in which the states are picking up on ways to stop diversity and inclusion in our public universities and in our workforce.
Yeah. Let me jump in here, and before I bring Brenda in, because you mentioned Oklahoma, and I'll be bringing Darren in because he lives there. So I'm very interested to hear from an educator standpoint. But we're talking with Valerie Colbert Osumwede and Brenda Bracel across the Love for Justice spectrum around all of this anti-DEI legislation. And so, Brenda, I want to toss it to you. And as I'm tossing it to you, I'm there, as Val has mentioned, a ton of states and the language, like for Alabama, their House Bill 7, public institutions in Alabama would be prohibited from promoting, endorsing, or requiring affirmation of certain divisive concepts relative to race, sex, or religion. I mean, that's so broad. That could be so many different things. And as I looked at the various different state for state, and we saw some of the names of the other states, which I think is important for people watching who might have family in states, and you're thinking, well, it's not my state. Whew. Well, your state could be next, right? Or your family could be living there. Brenda, I want to hand it to you and ask you, what do you think about this language? And do you think this is kind of some just political, or is it really undermining? Because my heart is happy about it, because my autumn is going to Texas and they've just signed, stuff into law. So I'm very concerned about it. What do you have to say?
Well, again, thank you for having me. It doesn't take a lot of extensive research. What we have to realize is there is a national plan. And the reason is some of the states, and Val did a great job of just kind of outlining some of the bills. The reason they've been able to roll out these bills so quickly is there are these conservative think tanks that prepare draft legislation to advance that agenda. And so when you look at these bills, and I was trying to pull up a few, and unfortunately I'm on my phone, so I couldn't share my screen. You'll notice that the language is almost identical, because they're basically taking this boilerplate legislation, which is one reason why it's so overly broad. It's not tailored toward any particular issue that has arisen in a particular state, but they just want to put the language out there to try and totally eliminate any concern for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in the same way that they're attacking education by this group, Moms for Liberty, where they're running school board candidates who are trying to ban books. And so I think what people have to recognize, don't be complacent because it's not in your particular state. It may not be in your state because either they don't have a majority who's willing to just buy into this wholesale, but rest assured that there's almost like what I want to say, a multi-tiered approach. We are trying to suppress voting so that we can control the minority vote, which will of course impact the outcome. So if we can pack these, state houses with Republicans who will buy into this agenda, and often they do, because with this legislation, they're also providing campaign funds. Mm-hmm. They are selecting people and promoting them. I mean, it's not by accident that we have, people like Santos who are able to make it through the primary and then make it into the general election. And now they're just parroting all of this information. And so I really, in terms of what should make people wake up, if we want to use the word woke, people should ask themselves, what is this in response to? What has occurred that all of a sudden DEI is, a three-letter word like sin? And then when you, like I said, well, if you take these bills and you lay them side by side, you can see that they're not necessarily picking candidates who are looking out for the best interests of their constituents. They're looking for candidates who are going to advance that agenda. And I mean, DeSantis is just a good example. When he decided that he wanted to, throw his hood in the ring for president, and I said hood because that's what I meant. All of a sudden, you start trying to curry favor with this base, not only of people who will vote, but also for, campaign donations. And so, he took on Mickey Mouse. Now, of course, Mickey Mouse has sufficient resources to push back, but for a lot of smaller corporations or smaller companies, they're not going to be able to mount a legal fight against some of this. So they're going to have to capitulate. If there's a law that says you have to eliminate your DEI program, even though it's wrong, if you're getting contracts from the state or from the municipality, what are you going to do? Go out of business? And so, I think it's a mistake for people to think, it's just a few people on the fringe. What we have is that, concerted effort. And like I say, you can tell it's concerted because if you get a chance, pull it up on the internet. I mean, that's one of the beauties of the internet. When you look at this language, some of this language from state to state to state is verbatim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That, and so then when you do some further research, you will, and there are a few of these, they call them think tanks. And of course, their position is that, well, we're not, necessarily trying to dictate the legislation. We're just trying to assist with the process and provide them with templates. But you have to recognize, and I'm gonna pray for Autumn because I pray for my grandsons in Texas all the time. The governor had the nerve to retweet, and I'm not a tweeter, what was a fake notice about a fake city in Texas. So you are the governor of Texas, and you didn't realize that this was fake and that the city that they referencing didn't exist in your state. So, clearly, we don't have people who are, totally invested in what is best for their constituents. And, these, well, I call them dog whistles. They become, like hot button phrases. Like Val said, woke has just been totally, mischaracterized. DEI is designed to take away the rights of people, as if, the people who are being served, are we not people? But again, if we remember, Mitch McConnell talked about African American voters versus American voters. So, I think when you look at the totality of the circumstances, it is clear that there is perceived an opportunity to roll back the clock. And that, to me, I think that is the ultimate goal. Yesterday, there was a Supreme Court decision that a gentleman had been stalking a singer and sent over 1,000 messages that were threatening. And they said, well, he has a right to free speech. And I find it so interesting that you have this expansive view of free speech, which is, to my knowledge, never endorsed the ability to threaten a person. But yet and still, somehow, diversity, equity, and inclusion, you can't be mentioned, or you can't mention certain parts of our history. So free speech is defined, I think, in their arena as, if you're saying what I want you to say, I want to give you the unfettered right to say that. And if it's not consistent with my beliefs, then we will just suppress it or eliminate it.
Yeah, that's exactly
You
it.
cover so much ground. You cover so much ground, and I want to make sure that I get Darren in here. But before I do that, of the many things that resonated with me, you talked about these think tanks, and I'm wondering, where are our think tanks? Because we got to mobilize those think tanks. There might be some, but we need more think tanks. People like Brenda, Val. We need think tanks, I think, and we need to be considering, when we're not voting for the school board, oftentimes we're like, oh, I'll pass that up on the ballot, but people are positioning people in these school boards for that. And so that's a great segue for me to bring in Darren, who is an educator and pastor in Oklahoma. So I'm going to bring him in right now. Darren, thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Thanks for having this critically important discussion at this critically important time.
Absolutely. And I want to jump in because Oklahoma is on the list. It says on January 19th, Republican state legislators introduced 2 bills that would prohibit public colleges in Oklahoma from funding DEI offices and using political tests, they say, and diversity statements in the hiring process. They had their secondary reading, both of the bills, in February, and are still going through the legislative process as of this month. So I want to talk to you, Darren, as an educator, and I know a noted educator starting a specific African and American teaching and track that has been over the country regarded well. How do you feel about what you are seeing in this anti-DEI environment?
How do I feel about it is quite an interesting question, because there is no kind of a excitement with me about it. I'm not shocked or surprised, because watching the social climate in this country, specifically since 2020, has set the stage for where we are now. And what is that talking about? With the worldwide protests that ensued after George Floyd's murder,
Right.
conservatives in America understood that they would be losing a lot of ground in the areas of race and with the issue of white supremacy. And so they doubled down in order to fight back, because major corporations, almost every industry in the country, got behind what was happening then. What we're seeing now is the fruit of them having gone in to push back on the tide that was changing the racial transcript of the United States of America. That's what we are realizing in 2023 with all of these bills and this legislation.
Absolutely.
And thinking about that so poignantly said, I think you should be running for office somewhere. But I'm taking this back to my think tank. So how do we get people thinking that way? Because I'm not sure everybody sees the relationship between the two. That when we try to push an advance forward, there is the pushback to. I heard somebody say, "Turn the clock back" or "turn the tide."
Sure.
How do we, across all of these industries, across all of these states, begin to develop more think tanks? I think Brenda was going to jump in there to say something, but it's open to you all, because I think some people are thinking about it, but some people are thinking about it far too lightly and too late.
Very true, because thinking is one of the enemies of our current time.
Right.
And thinking well is even more hated and assailed. So that, yes, think tanks, and believe it or not, see it or not, this setting, this what you have created right here, is the making of a think tank, because it's drawn minds in that's aware of what is happening in the current political social divide, and is actually addressing those issues with enumerating the problems, of course, but also talking about how to do it. Brother Marcus, though, thinking is one of the things that our people do have to come back to. And you mentioned me being an educator and being in the public school system. Let me tell you one more time, thinking is something that our people have to come back to. I think, again, that on this level, with podcasts like this, shows like this is a way to begin to create actual think tanks.
You are so right when you say that our people have to get back to thinking. All people, but our people really need to get back to thinking, because these things are designed to affect us specifically.
Yes.
And it is just it really sometimes amazes me, and I know you're an educator too, but it amazes me sometimes, just in my general work setting, how people don't want to evaluate, read, have critical thinking. They want you to do that for them, and that's very dangerous, very, very dangerous. And so can we ever get back to, engaging people's minds to say, you read this. What do you think? What's your analysis?
Sure.
And it's very and it's scary actually. The way in which people will abdicate their abilities or their really right to think because they just don't want to. And it's and I would agree. I would think that when 2020, and of course the person that was in the White House during that time has totally or did totally denigrate that concept of thinking, fake news and all of that kind of stuff. And so you have people that rely not on picking up an article or going to several sources to get to understand an ideal. They're waiting for someone to feed them the ideal and the analysis and what they should be doing. And that's very, very true that we do not have critical thinking enough in our communities.
And you said it. Let me say very quickly. You mentioned how scary it is, that it's dangerous, and the reason is because what the sister mentioned just a moment ago. She talked about these dog whistle politics, this gaslighting. Because if you cannot analyze, if you don't have the ability to be able to analyze and think through what you're hearing, and this is what politics, this is what our culture has been trained for. All they have to do is say certain code words,
right?
And it automatically ignites and even mobilizes groups of people. That's why it's so scary and dangerous. If you're not able to think through the rhetoric that's being actually aimed at you and intended to cause you to act.
Yeah. I'm going to abdicate for a moment. I'm going to read, and I want to just use a few minutes for you all to then interpret. I want to go back to some of these states and some of the language, and I just want to read them, and you tell us how dangerous you think this is, or what are the potentials that you think, potentialities that could happen with some of these laws. And anybody feel free to jump in. I'm going to just go to a few of them, and then I want to hear from you and get a sense of really how dangerous this could be for many states. So I'm going to South Carolina. Don't shame me, South Carolina, if you're saying, why you go to South Carolina? I just went to South Carolina. South Carolina's House Bill 4289 and House Bill 4290 would ban public institutions from establishing mandatory diversity training and diversity statements, and from using diversity statements for consideration in hiring and admissions practices. How dangerous is that? How dangerous is that?
Well, I think the goal of trying to put a muzzle on the public institutions, obviously you threaten that if you don't abide by this, then we're going to withhold funding. And obviously you need funding to survive. But more importantly, I think people are complacent saying, okay, well, we just can't mention it. But what we don't often realize is often it is those statements, it is those offices that serve as the first avenue when a person has a complaint of discriminatory treatment or unfair hiring practices. So you're basically gutting the ability of the institution to address those issues, because obviously if I have a DEI officer and I see a situation where there's blatant discrimination, okay, there's a place that I can go to at least start the process to address it. So I've eliminated that. I have no language where the institution is bound by those principles. Now, I can always try and go to the EEOC, but we have to recognize the EEOC is often regional. And so, you have to be realistic in terms of what is likely to be the response. And I think it ultimately will have a chilling effect. I didn't have time to do a lot of research on this, but I was looking at the number of DEI officers who have voluntarily left their positions in the wake of so much of this proposed legislation, and it's over 50%.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
So I mean, that again, it can definitely, I think, have a chilling effect on the
Mhm.
ability of an individual to
Mhm.
assert their rights against unfair treatment.
And it's interesting you saying that over 50% of folks who were in DEI positions have left their positions.
Mm.
Think about 2020. And that kind of fueled all of this DEI,
Right.
all of these certifications, all of this hiring. That was just 3 years ago. And
Yeah.
you're talking about now, 3 years later, 50% of folks that were in those roles have left
Yeah.
DEI positions.
And,
That
and if you look at it, I mean, some of them tell some anecdotal, stories, but once that, and I think Darren, he said it's so right. It was that pushback. Once that ball started rolling, some of them found that they were basically impotent because they, instead of funding a staff of 10, you were the only person in the whole division. Or there started being a lot of nitpicking about your work and your the quality of your work. And I think obviously on an individual level, now you get concerned. I don't want to be drummed out of academia altogether, so I start looking for another position because this is going to affect my livelihood. So I think the pushback is definitely having an effect, and I think now it's just starting to snowball.
Sure,
and,
sure.
and
Go
and
ahead.
and just to piggyback a little bit, when you said how does it impact, I even look at, if you think about higher education, uh, Black professors, those and those individuals who are even allies to us, um, and you have these laws that are vague enough at this point in time because they have not yet been constitutionally tested in the courts yet. And you have these laws now. What do you do? What if they're so vague? How do we get sponsors for Black groups?
Right.
And how do we get professors and teachers and or teaching assistants or whatever, who may not know what to say exactly, what is limited, what is off bounds. How do we get that kind of dialogue in the classroom? You can't, because people are, it's a chilling effect. It is a absolute chilling effect to teach something that will, according to Mr. DeSantos and other anti-woke legislatures, that will make those who are not like us feel bad. That's part of the mantra, that especially when you're talking about the K through 12 education, is that we don't want our children to feel bad about them being white, or that kind of thing, in the majority, if you can call it that these days. But all of those, that vagueness definitely chills the effectiveness of teaching. That's exactly what it's intended to do. It is
Yeah.
intended to chill
That's right.
the academic freedom and thought of professors. And I should say that it works both ways, not only for progressives, but for conservatives too.
Right.
And so you do have some in academia, even conservatives, like pushing against these laws, because it's an attack on tenure. That Florida bills is like, even if you
Right.
have tenure, they can come up every 5 years and review at any time if you are violating this new law. And so you say, how does that affect that? Well, it affects the future of how we have our children, or our society thinking. Once again, critically changing how people think.
Mhm.
Brother Marcus,
Darren, did you want to?
to directly answer your question, there was so much in both of what they said that I want to speak to. I can't speak to it. I sure enough want to, but I can't do it. But to directly respond to your question, all we need to do is answer this question. Why were DEI programs created in the first place? Why was affirmative action put into place in the first place? And the answer is this: because our nation was openly, officially, legally racist.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
These programs and policies came into place because our government recognized that the history of this country, with critical race built into every institution in the country, had to be addressed publicly. That's why we got these things in the first place. And what is being said in the actions that are occurring right now, and again, there's always a connection, and that's what's not happening too often. We're not making the connections with the past, but the past is the key to the present. And that is when Donald Trump talked about making America great again, that resonated with the core of conservative Republican America, but not just them. And I got to say it, and I just got to say it because I'm about telling the truth, but a whole lot of Democrats understood that the way of life before African Americans had as much freedom as the courts and the government gave was a better way of life for them. Because we can't get where we are. We can't play these games by Republicans just doing what they're doing. Congress is made up of both houses, and some in other houses are always voting for stuff that when you look at this stuff and you say, oh, Democrats voted for that too. And I'm not going there because that's too much in that. But my point is this, that what we're again seeing when Donald Trump made that statement, enough Americans said yes to making America great again. And what we are, again, realizing in our faces, all of these are attempts to go back to a racist, white supremacist America.
And if I tell you that is so, I mean, if you look at the, and what kind of threw me on the, not threw me, but I was just like incredulous. When I was looking at the Ohio state law, he introduced not only the broad prohibition of teaching anything that systematic racism, sexism, oppression, and privilege are inherent in the institutions, which is what the brother was talking about, institutions of the United States, and were created to maintain social, political, and economic inequalities, which of course we know that's why they were created. Mm-hmm. But he also has a ban where you can't partner with Chinese universities because there's an Asian backlash too in this country. And so you can't even, in the law, you can't even partner with Chinese universities in this Ohio state bill. Incredulous. It's just out there. You know, it is out there for everybody to see, and anybody that can think should be able to connect the dots.
Well, I think we have to recognize that, you know, part of this is to what I call revise history. You know, I know that, you know, in years past, there were policies and laws passed in response to recognizing there had been institutional and systemic racism, redlining. Okay, but you know what? All that's been resolved. We had a Black president, so we just don't have to do anything for him. And unfortunately, you know, I listened to Tim Scott, and I had to kind of force myself to listen because I think you have to hear what everybody's saying. You know, we now have Black candidates, who are now parroting that my family went from sharecroppers to Senate in just 2 generations. So we can no longer say that America is holding you back, without recognizing that there's always been a willingness to open the door just a crack to let one or two people through that were perceived as safe. But when you start talking about systemic racism, we're talking about how the door was closed on whole classes of people for no other reason than their race. In terms of jobs, what level of jobs you could get. And we're not talking about ancient history. I remember when my dad, there was a huge fight in the auto industry to get African Americans into the skilled trades. You can come in and work for $5 a day. You ought to be happy to get that. But you want to be a welder? You want to be an industrial painter? Oh, now don't be crazy. And then, and you can use a Tim Scott to say, see, you can make it if you just apply yourself. And it's just so unfortunate that, for whatever reason, people are being complacent. And I always tell people when I have a conversation with them, how can you just be so worked up about this? It's just a fringe. I say, if, recognize that if this can happen in the span of one term, what do you think it will look like in 10 years and 20 years from now? Once these things take hold, do you ever think that, once affirmative action is eliminated, once DEI and all these things are eliminated, once the schools are no longer able to even teach an accurate depiction of American history, how do you think you'll ever return back to a fair and level system?
Yeah, we're talking to Brenda Bracewell, Valerie Colbert-Osunwady, and Darren Williams, and hopefully you across all of these platforms as you are hopefully gleaning and starting to think critically about what's happening, not only in the states that we've called, but in the state of our nation. And so I want to talk a little bit, because I've seen across a number of these pieces of legislation, kind of dismantling admissions practices. And of course, that's close to my heart with having my niece getting into Thurgood Marshall School of Law and thinking of all of the other young people that are coming behind her. Talk to me about this dismantling as I see it. How do you see these admission practices? What would you advise people to be thinking about critically as see language relative to that?
Well, affirmative action is going to be gone. I'm just waiting for the decision, which we got to June 30th to get the decision, and and we've gotten a few little wins because I think they're trying to soften the blow. Couple of wins on some of these Supreme Court decisions in the last few weeks, because they're trying to soften the blow that affirmative action is going to be gutted. If it isn't, I will be shocked. Okay. But it's been coming, it's been coming. It's been chipping away for quite a long time. And when you think about the genesis of affirmative action, and you think about when Lyndon Johnson did a speech at Howard University, and he made this statement. He said, "You can't wipe away scars of a century by saying you are free to go where you want to go, do what you want to, choose what you want to, choose your leaders. You cannot do that. You can't bring the person who has been for centuries hobbled, and then bring them up and say, okay, everything's good." You can't do that. He was the one that framed that whole concept. Not to mention, if we really want to go back to the Civil War amendments that actually was utilized to do certain things for which would really be affirmative action. But our 14th Amendment is meant to right the wrongs of slavery. It is an amendment. And so even though those arguments were made in the Supreme Court, and I want to say quite eloquently by Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Yes.
I mean, it is still going to be, you don't need a person, a swing vote or anything like that, because you got enough folks that are going to gut affirmative action, and it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And I just look at some of the things that, because you got the two cases with the University of North Carolina and Harvard. And Harvard, it's not the Harvards that are going to really suffer that, because Harvard has so much money. It's just ridiculous. It's not the Harvards or the Yales or the Stanfords or the Princetons. It's our middle tier universities where most of our kids go, that are going to be harmed by the fact that affirmative action, that those things cannot be considered, because Harvard has said, hey, do away with affirmative action, we do away with legacy,
Right.
So those are the things that, is right. Affirmative action is going to go. When you get that Supreme Court decision, Marcus, get ready to do another show, because it's going to happen.
I'm only going to do it if you all promise to come back. Because I did want to ask you, because I was going to try to close with that, Val, but that's why I see For the Love of Justice, you can handle, just like Darren does his own show. You and Brenda can do your own show. But and that's my vision for it. I'm saying it out there now. I'm putting them on the spot, America. They carry this For the Love of Justice, which is important to my heart, as important as the love and the scriptures and all the other love shows that I think I'm creating a network. I don't know what love of justice is so important, because we have a treasure trove of faith and knowledge that we have to hand to the next generation and to the existing generation, where people are saying, oh, we repent and we amend it, but we forgetting what we amended to. Someone has got to stand up to hold them to the love of justice. So that's my speech. But I'm going to have you back, because when you come back, I want to ask, so since this is going to harm our children who are going to go to predominantly white schools, but our response be from a separatist type of standpoint, where we build up our historically Black colleges? What should be our response, knowing that they're going to try to make it hard for our children? What should we do as a community? Now, that's what I want you to think on when you come back.
Okay.
Well, I can
Not now. When we come back, okay.
Okay, but I can just tell you this.
You can hit it now, but we would be in overdrive.
Yeah, I can just say this. Historically Black colleges have said something about this. They've actually said, we cannot absorb all of that. We don't have the resources,
the capacity
to absorb that. So that's already been out there. Okay, that's already been out there as it relates to HBCUs thinking about what's going to happen, because we know that attendance at HBCUs is on the rise now, but they've already said there's no way that we're going to be able to absorb all of the students that don't make it into a wherever, a Wayne State or a Michigan, or or places like that. They already said they don't have that ability.
And I think, again, that's one of the unfortunate aspects of it, because my grandson goes to TSU, Texas Southern University, and they already had an increase in enrollment, but they don't have the dorm capacity. So they're now moving. When you enter your sophomore year, they've actually appropriated some nearby apartment complexes and putting 4 students, per apartment. So they just the infrastructure is not there for them to suddenly go, and increase their enrollment by 200-300%. They just don't have the number of classrooms, don't have the instructors. And so I don't think it's from lack of will or lack of desire. The infrastructure is just not there to absorb those numbers. And I think that's part of the plan, that basically, Black women will go from being the most educated segment of America to, there may be 50% of those people who just don't have anywhere to go.
And I could tell you all a story that is occurring in Oklahoma right now, which is the reason why HBCUs do not have the funding or the capacity to be able to handle this backdraft. Let me just mention the case. For the past, I know it's 2 decades, I think it might be 3 decades, Langston University, which I was a student in. Let me insert this part because she talked about affirmative action in such a way. The teeth have been taken out of affirmative action a long time ago. When I went to Langston University, I went at the time when the Supreme Court had ruled that action could not just be for the purpose of allowing African Americans to be admitted into institutions of higher education. White students were attending HBCUs under the affirmative action law. So when I got to class at Langston, my classes were sometimes up to 40% white students at a historically Black college, the university. But that institution, Langston, has been in litigation with Oklahoma State University. I think it's 3 decades. I know it's 2 for sure, because federal funding in the multiple millions of dollars that had been earmarked for Langston University have been being held up by Oklahoma State University, who does not want Langston to have the money. And you can ask how that happens, because the Board of Regents for those schools have stepped in, and I can't tell you the whole story, but that's what we're facing with our institutions. There are monies that have supposed to have been released to our Black schools that are in contingency because there are white powerful entities behind white universities that are holding that funds up. And last thing I want to say, Brother Marcus, that justice, the love of justice, I got to say this. Our usage of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and of all of these nice political terminologies have been slated not to be successful for African American people in the long run anyway, because those terms are short-sighted in what the issue really is. The issue is justice, pure and simple, not social justice. Because to understand social justice means that you have to segment, that you have to dissect, that you have to partialize justice and meet it out into little pieces. Justice that is not whole is not justice. The Bible does not know a concept of social justice. From the biblical perspective, from the perspective of God, justice is a holistic enterprise. And so if you tell me that you are just interested in white people not hitting me in my head and stalking me, that's social justice. But you're not interested in my educational justice, my political justice, and all of the other areas that affects my life, then you are not serious about me being free and having justice. And so that's one of the things I think, sisters and brothers, we've got to really re-examine as we are, and because we're just swayed back and forth, we're pawns in these discussions about diversity and equity and inclusion and multiculturalism and those things. If it's not justice and whole justice, we're really not talking about what our issue is as a people and what we should be fighting for.
Love it.
Well, and there's nothing new under the sun. If you read the book of Amos, it talks forcefully about, like he said, about justice and fairness and how to treat your fellow man. So, we're just seeing another reiteration of that.
Sure.
But like I said, God, that's not the story when you talk about what is justice. I agree.
Well, before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to share any last thoughts. I got to have you back because I'm interested to see exactly how much gutting is gutting when we see the Supreme Court decision. And I'm always more than just identifying, I want to know solutions, right? I want to know, what should we tell the average Marcus who just works his good city job, though I have a great diversity, equity, and inclusion story, and Val knows about it, where it was a chilling effect. I have to come back and talk about that another time. But what does the average Marcus do when he sees that there's legislation happening in all of the states around him, and he sees that there could be impact to his state or to his children attending school in a specific state, or their employment or hiring practices? What would you advise the average Marcus to do?
Well, average Marcus, I'm gonna first say once, but we always say it's a 4-letter word: vote. These people are in office, vote. But I say that affirmative action as it relates to, and I know you probably get on this topic again later, as it relates to how it is being done now. I don't think that any school is going to back away from a diverse student body. They're going to find a different way to do it. It's just not going to be called affirmative action. Okay. So they're going to always they're going to recognize, and let me tell you, the educational community has been watching this for a long time, and actually making plans and changing, how they talk about diversity and the choice of students. So that's already been in the works. I can just tell you that now. So where it won't be affirmative action that's been gutted by, Bakke, which was the first case that did it. In this last one, the one that they're going to take care of, by June 30th. But there is going to be, and there is a recognition of the need in higher education, in the majority, because we do have conservative places, of how to diversify and bring different people onto campuses. Now, whether or not they want to talk about socioeconomic kind of looking at things socioeconomically, that still is going to impact African Americans. If they start looking at that, that's still going to impact African Americans. It will also impact poor whites as well. But which goes back to the whole thought of MLK, who began thinking about things in the socioeconomic sphere as opposed to just the racial sphere. Another thing that people are trying to dismantle, of course, even in this dismantling of DEI, they're also dismantling gender studies. They're dismantling discussion of LGBTQ issues. All of that is because that's a coalition of people, marginalized people, that they want to disenfranchise. No matter how you feel about it, that's what they want to disenfranchise. So it's no surprise that this and I look at Florida as the ultimate think tank, because Florida started with the whole thing about don't say gay, and supposedly giving parents more authority. Then it was, we don't want to have advanced placement African studies in high school. Then it was banning books, and it just moved till now we got this other legislation. So I would just say that we need to continue, and I hope we are continue to always mentor and foster our young people in their minds. And we have to do that. That is a mandate that we have to do. And, to make them ready, should they choose to go to college, to make them ready to be able to my words are losing, but to be able to be looked at as a serious student, okay? And and let's be real. When you get into these colleges, some of these prestigious ones, so to speak, whether or not you needed affirmative action or not, they think you did.
Right.
They all think that you're there because of it. But the fact of the matter is, we need to make sure that we are fostering our young people's minds. If the school is not teaching it, we need to be teaching it. You can teach these things in community spots, through churches, through Girl Scouts, whatever avenue you have, sitting at your kitchen table. All of these things, we have to foster those things that are lacking. And we know that they're lacking. We have I believe, an affirmative duty to make sure that we are fostering,
Like
our
that.
young people's minds. And
Like
again,
that.
I'm going to say the 4-letter word. You better be voting.
Yes. All right.
And to piggyback on that, in addition to voting, we need to recognize that institutions run on dollars. And so, the NAACP, ACLU, the Southern Poverty Law Center, those institutions that are trying to fight the good fight, don't play lottery today, send them $20. And I think that, again, having an agenda and having a voice and having a presence, then you have some ability to try and impact some of these things. But the biggest issue is we just cannot be complacent. It may not be touching you today, but I guarantee you tomorrow it'll touch your children, your grandchildren, your neighbor. And like the old proverb said, everybody let the guy come in and pick you off one by one. When he comes for you, there's nobody to help you.
Wow. I'll say this in response first to Sister mentioned the AP African American Studies course. One of our counselors just told me today that students, and these are her words, are signing up in droves for my AP African American Studies class that I'm teaching at McClellan High School here. The other thing I want to say, you asking a question, Brother Marcus, should we be considering separatism if these issues about entering into other institutions are there, or as they are there? Personally, this is me speaking for me. I always believe we are better teachers to ourselves than anybody else. I always have a separatist idea of how we need to conduct ourselves. Now that's personal. Now that's me. All right. I just have to put that out there. But I think that education is always first a home education, because when it starts at home, the identity piece of who we are starts at home. You can send us to anybody's institution in anybody's country, and the light is going to be shining from us when we go there. But the last thing that I would say to a young Marcus, a little Marcus, is stay woke. And of course, wokeness has got the ire of the conservatives. It's DeSantis's political mantra, which only proves the hypocrisy of white Christians in America. Mm-hmm. Why? Because every urgence of the New Testament is about us being awake. Yeah. Be sober.
Be
all
sober.
Right.
Be
the
vigilant.
scriptures literally talk about
Look
us
up.
being awake. Okay. So for Republicans, for conservatives to rail against wokeness proves, let me say this. It shows what their understanding of the scriptures, what their value of the Bible is compared to their political beliefs. It makes them hypocrites. I said it here. Any conservative Christian against wokeness is a hypocrite. Right. Why? Because wokeness, in my estimation, does not just mean to be alert and out of slumber. It means to be learning and to be educated. But it does not stop there, because you have to then do something with what you now know that you didn't know before. And so I say stay woke, because we've got to be aware of what's happening. We've got to be learning more about what's happening, and we've got to be doing something about what's happening. That's what I would say.
Don't just be hearers of the word, be doers.
Come on, talk to me now. Talk to me.
But that's a whole nother show, Marcus.
I don't know. I'm gonna call y'all to testify about the doing, because I'm gonna come back with some things. I've heard so many wonderful things about, and I think you're right. There are things that we could do to help strengthen the family to teach these things, right? Because there has been an assault on the family. There are things that we could partner with churches to teach these things, right? Yes. There are a lot of opportunities in this for the love of justice. And I just, I love to see the love of justice have more legs in the community, because oftentimes the average person thinks that the problem is too big for one person to start. But the problem needs one person who wants change to get together with other people and partner to bring about change, one bite at a time, one step at a time, one action at a time. And so I am heartened by your brilliance. I am thankful by your presence, and I am going to have you back. Thank you, Valerie Colbert-Oswin-Wady. Thank you, Darren Williams. Thank you, Brenda Braceful. What an enlightening hour, a little bit more than an hour, but we got to have you back. And I can't wait to have you back so that I can tell everybody I got some new co-hosts for the love of justice. I think that you do an excellent job, and I appreciate all of the thought that you brought today. And if you want to follow any of them, follow them on Facebook. Of course, you can join Darren Williams tomorrow with Darren Williams on Love and the Scriptures. And it's Black Music Appreciation Month, so you're going to hear some great things about Black Appreciation Month, and continue the conversation, whether you are on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitch TV or Twitter or YouTube events. Click share and keep this conversation going about our awakeness, our wokeness, and anybody that's anti-woke, as you heard Darren say, is hypocritical. I can't wait for the feedback on that. Thank you so much for joining us.
Love
I
you
appreciate
guys.
all of
Thank
you
you
for being here. And I hope that thank you so much. I hope you will be back.
Bless you, my sisters. Thank you, Brother Marcus. God bless you. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.